to give you this event with technology that allows us to do this safely. And we're glad you're joining us from the comfort of wherever you are in the world, because that's the other fortunate thing. We could have people come from all over the world if we can. You'll notice that the audience has been muted to eliminate background noises, which can be distracting from our learning together. We have enabled the chat, and I hope you're able to use that to allow you to submit questions directly to our panelists. We will collect your questions, try to organize them so that we have queries and topics, and so we can keep the discussion going. We will dedicate time to answer the questions towards the end of the program, allowing our panelists to present to you first. So we thank you in advance for thinking of any questions, and that will hopefully help enhance our understanding of the text and the thoughts that are offered. We are especially proud that this annual tradition of this program is continuing, and it allows the PJCC, the Peninsula Jewish Community Center, to enhance our value of kahila, mishpacha, and serve as a hub and convener to provide dialogue, collaboration, and Jewish education alongside our partnering organizations. We really have a true partnership throughout the North Peninsula Jewish community, and we are grateful for the long-time and committed partners of Congregation Beth Jacob, Peninsula Sinai Congregation, Peninsula Temple Bethel, Peninsula Temple Sholom, and the Warnick Jewish Day School, which is on our campus. This year, we also are excited to introduce simultaneously Bay Area and national presence with the added partnership of the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America with Joshua Ladon, Rabbi Joshua Ladon, and who's their director of education, stepping into the role of moderator. So we thank Josh for his participation and coordination. I also want to acknowledge the Koret Foundation and the Toby Philanthropies for their proud partnership in the initiative of Jewish peoplehood. So I know you all are eager to hear the wisdom of our esteemed panelists. First, Rabbi Ilana Goldhaber-Gordon of Congregation Beth Jacob, Rabbi Lisa Kingston of Peninsula Temple Bethel, Cantor Zhar of Peninsula Temple Sholom, and finally, Cantor Doron Shapira from Peninsula Sinai Congregation. With that, I'm happy to turn it over with gratitude to Rabbi Joshua Ladon of the Shalom Hartman Institute. Josh?
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to the PJCC for hosting us. And I'm really thrilled and pleased to get to be a part of this panel. Really, as a facilitator and as a learner, we're just under 2 weeks away from Rosh Hashanah, not to make all of the clergy who are on our panel who actually have to work hard those days quake. But this is the time when we're supposed to be thinking about tzedakah, tefillah, and tshuva, right? To prayer and service and repentance, and to give alms, to make restitution. This is the time we're supposed to do this. We're supposed to do that all the time. This is especially the time to do this. And it's, of course, a core line, it's maybe the pinnacle line of Unetaneh Tokef, the piyut, the liturgical prayer that we'll spend our evening discussing, it has a pinnacle towards the middle of collectively saying out loud tzedakah, tefillah, and tshuva. So our evening will look like this. We'll spend about 45 minutes in conversation amongst the five of us, our four esteemed panelists, and then I'll occasionally, jump in with a hopefully not too inane remark, and then we'll open it up to questions. I invite you to chat me your questions throughout the evening, and then I'll aggregate those and turn those into questions that our panelists can engage with. Just as a word of introduction, Unetaneh Tokef, really one of the most famous, if not the most famous piece of liturgy throughout the high holidays, probably rivaled only by Avinu Malkeinu. And Unetaneh Tokef is a piyut. It's a liturgical poem written in Ashkenaz, in Germany. I think the 11th or 12th century. We'll hear some history later. And it's a feature, sort of traditionally it was written for the Musaf service right before the Kedusha. Obviously, the various denominations, and if you're Sephardi, if you're Reform, if you're Renewal, if you're there are a range of traditions that have built up around Unetaneh Tokef, and it's actually not in every Siddur, and there are certainly communities that do not say Unetaneh Tokef, but in American Ashkenazi congregations, it tends to be said. And what's also interesting about it is that it is found both on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, linking the two days. It really takes us through the major themes, these themes of awe and fear, the themes of judgment, of standing before God. And it has and we'll talk about this more this evening, it has a very immanent God. God is there, God is judging, God also has the capacity for being compassionate. And we as the congregation, we stand in this moment in judgment. So it's a really powerful poem. I want to invite our panelists, because I will say, as we were preparing for this, several of them said, we're really excited to talk about this. In part, it's both a dynamic piece of liturgy, especially coming out of 18 months of COVID. It feels especially resonant and powerful and robust, and it does stuff to us that we want prayer to do. We want liturgy to transform us and to touch us in our kishkas, and it does that. So as a way of introducing you to our panelists, I'd love for each of you to take a moment and share with us, this is such a dynamic piece of liturgy. It is a central focus of both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I'd love for you to tell us, what excites you about anchoring our conversation this evening in Unetaneh Tokef. What makes it unique for you? What makes it thrilling, exciting, powerful? What draws you to this prayer, and why this conversation tonight? I'll start with Rabbi Lisa, and we'll go from there.
Well, thanks, Rabbi Joshua. I know it feels weird to sort of say, like, what excites me about this piyut or this prayer is the violence. I'm gonna just already start off like that's a weird thing to say, but what I think this poem does is just head on address the harshness of the world, and that immediately it doesn't try to sugarcoat how unfair or random or painful life can sometimes be, and instead of trying to sort of rationalize our way around it, it just says everyone will have to face the question, who shall live and who shall die? And there's this sort of really interesting backstory that I also think speaks to some of the violence and the harshness of how this poem may have come to be. So Rabbi Joshua, you said that, it's Ashkenazic, meaning it's from Germany. That's sort of agreed upon. The timeline is interesting. It's debatable whether it was from the Byzantine era, 6th or 7th century, because fragments of it were found in the Cairo Geniza, or whether it was written later in Germany in the 11th century. But even the sort of mystery origins of how this prayer came to be sort of makes it interesting. And there's a legend that surrounds it. And it starts with this Rabbi Amnon of Mainz. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, probably Mainz, area of Germany. And apart from this story, he's really not found in rabbinic literature. So already it's like, who is this rabbi and why is he named in this story? But we are to understand that he was friends with the archbishop of Mainz, and this archbishop pressured Rabbi Amnon to convert to Catholicism. And Rabbi Amnon tried to kind of delay, or first he agreed, and then he asked for a few days, 3 days in particular, to kind of think about it and reflect upon it. And in those 3 days, he came to kind of realize about himself, how could I have possibly agreed to this? This is such a betrayal of who I am, of my religion. I can't go through with this. So he was asked to be brought in front of the archbishop, and he begged that his tongue be cut out of his mouth to atone for his sin. And the archbishop was angry at Rabbi Amnon for sort of the betrayal and not following through in his orders. So he had his arms and legs amputated as a punishment for not being willing to go through with the conversion. And then again, at each amputation, Rabbi Amnon was given another opportunity to convert, and he refused. And he was sent home without his extremities, just as a body. And he asked that body be brought to the synagogue. And this was on Erev Yom Kippur. He was brought as he lay dying. He was carried into the synagogue, where he recited from his soul, from his heart, these words of Unetaneh Tokef in his last breath. So I share this legend, one, because it's so crazy and out there and interesting, but again, to sort of say, why do we have this so extreme story that goes around with this poem? Part of it is, I think, to role model teshuvah, right? If our goal is teshuvah, there's no greater example of teshuvah than sort of being tortured in order to stand for what you believe in. But also, again, I think that the harshness of life, the pain and the injustice that we might all experience, and how prayer comes from our surrounding circumstances and what we are experiencing. So prayers in that way can be dark, can be angry, can be questioning of God, can be questioning the fairness of the world. And I think that's something that Unetaneh Tokef does for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Lucy. It's really beautiful. It reminds me of when many years ago, when I was a young lad in yeshiva, my Rosh Yeshiva said, you should be practicing during the month of Elul, and you should be crying at Shul. Like this is like sort of like a moment. It's really powerful to hear you say this story is both about tshuva and it's about it's about arguing about the unfairness, right? Like it's not just a passive. So I hope it's a really powerful story to bring up, and I think to move us along with our panelists, Cantor, Anna, you are one of the people who will facilitate that prayer experience with music, and that's a tall order. I wonder, share with us, for you, what is it about approaching this prayer, and what excites you and what challenges you and all of that?
Thank you, Rabbi Joshua. Thank you, Rabbi Lisa, for sharing this amazing and tragic story. of our Jewish people. I was wondering if I would ask any Cantor around here, and we have only me and Doron, but also rabbis and any clergy, what would bring the most emotional reaction during the high holidays? What prayer would do that? And I would say, yes, that would be definitely for me, Unetaneh Tokef. So, when I heard that we are going to be talking about Unetaneh Tokef prayer, I was very excited to share my thoughts, because there are so many settings that different synagogues worshiping and experiencing on the high holidays. And I am really excited to present you with two of those settings. And I think Cantor Doron is gonna also talk about two other settings. And I just wanted to talk about the music and how music highlights the liturgy in a different way, and how sometimes the music or musical composition brings a different interpretation to the traditional or so-called traditional prayer of Unetaneh Tokef. In fact, for example, I would like to share with you Leonard Cohen's Unetaneh Tokef, so-called Who by Fire. And it is not a traditional text. This is not the text that you will find in our prayer books, but that's the text that actually recalls this tragic story that Rabbi Lisa just mentioned, and Rabbi Joshua, you just mentioned about this controversy of this prayer. And it sort of, brings us to the question, and in his interpretation of Unetaneh Tokef prayer, it ends with a question mark. Who shall I say is calling? So it really brings a different angle to Unetaneh Tokef prayer, and the question becomes more important than the answer. And another setting that I would like to share also is Max Janowski, and I know Cantor Doron is going to share Lewandowski version of Unetaneh Tokef and touch upon Israeli version of Unetaneh Tokef. So all these different settings, music settings, bring us completely different interpretation, and they highlight different parts of liturgy in a different ways.
I love the idea of the question being more powerful than the answer, and it speaks to Ilana, Rabbi Ilana, what you were sharing. You were so excited to get into this liturgy, and that idea of when you approach liturgy, there's a real drama there. And I'd love to hear what do you bring to this prayer, and what does it bring for you?
Thank you. I keep finding myself nodding my head, agreeing with everything that each of you are saying. You're capturing it. You're capturing the way in which this poem captures my heart. As you said, Rabbi Josh, it does stuff to us. I also, before I say a little bit about what this prayer does to me, I do want to acknowledge that it's also a challenging prayer, and there's kind of a resistance. I don't want to touch this kind of theology, a God standing in judgment over me. That's not the kind of God I want in my life. I want a compassionate God, a motherly God, a fatherly God. Jewish liturgy, Jewish writing is filled with much more loving images of God. But prayer is not theology, and I guess we'll get to that a little bit later. Prayer is drama, and there's space for this as well. So the way I think of it is, if you go to a powerful movie, for example, and a movie that addresses social issues or tells a tragic story, even though it's fictional, you still cry, and you are still changed by the experience. Right? So whether your own concept of God is one of a God sitting in judgment, I find every year I am able to surrender to that imagined experience of sitting and being judged, and it shakes me up. And kind of a concrete example of how it shakes me up is, if you look at my family's tzedakah giving. There are 2 times a year that we give the most. I also happen to be a person who need deadlines, right? So one is at the end of the tax year, and the other is Erev Rosh Hashanah, leading up to the holidays. And there's no question in my mind that it's Unetaneh Tokef that's provoking that. It's not simply the fact of the high holidays. And I think kind of one other element I want to point out, part of the drama for me at least, most of our liturgy is the collective, is written in the collective. And I'm much more comfortable in that space. We are collectively responsible for what we're doing to our planet. We are collectively responsible for how we succeeded or failed to respond to the pandemic. We each and every one of us as part of the group is responsible, but Unetaneh Tokef, it's not unique. There are other places in the liturgy that lift up personal accountability, but it is the only place where personal accountability is lifted up so prominently. The other places, the other prayers that talk about personal accountability are kind of tucked in small places, but here it's declared loud and clear. Your actions as an individual matter. The fingerprint of every human being is there. Each and every one of us is standing in that moment alone. And so for me, that triggers a real sense of soul searching. Where am I at? Where am I going? What do I need to do next?
Beautiful. Acharon Aviv, Cantor Doron, you're going to be doing double duty this year.
Yeah, so they say.
You're really holding your community together. Tell us what does Unetaneh Tokef do for you, and what do you want it to do for your community, and what excites you about this?
Yeah, wow. And you put me after all those incredible teachers and speakers. But I will share anything. I will try to share a few thoughts that maybe slipped through the cracks that they didn't get to, and I'll probably repeat a few things as well. But I wanted to start by saying thank you, because this is truly an honor. I know this is the 11th year of this roundtable. Throughout the years, I have always been busy with choirs, teen choirs and adult choirs on Tuesday and Wednesday nights. And I think I've only seen 2. One was last year because it was on Zoom and I was able to sneak in for part of it. And we didn't have a choir. And one other time when I was able to come live, and I'm just so honored. I guess I should also thank, I think it was Bill Futornik last year, I think, of Beth Jacob, who broke the rabbinic glass ceiling so that others can be here as well. I'm very honored, so thank you. Yeah, I thought I would just share a few words on why I love this poem so much, why it speaks to me as a cantor. Not only, I don't think that prior to doing cantorial work, it spoke to me in the same way. And I would, in just preparing, I came across Herman Wouk. Some of you may have read This Is My God. It's a classic of American Jewish classic, where he says, I think Rabbi Josh said earlier, this is he considers this the central poem of Yom Kippur, right? And if we were to ask, I think, what would most of you consider a central poem or prayer? Most would probably say Avinu Malkeinu Kol Nidre, I think a lot would say. But this ties it together in such a way. So I'll say a few things. One is, I never leave the chanting. I never exit the chanting of Unetaneh Tokef without feeling better in a way. In thinking about this, I thought this too may seem a little unusual, but I feel like whenever I'm at a cemetery, I always leave there a better person. It's this reality check, at least for me, whether it's a funeral, an unveiling, or just a visit. And we do, it's traditional this time of year to visit, right? So our loved ones. That's one thing about it. I think much of it challenges us. We've already heard about some challenging theology. And to be honest, I hope I'm not offending my friend, Rabbi Lisa. I'm not a big fan of the Rabbi Amnon story, even though I see the beauty of it. And and doing a little research, no, the historians really do believe it predates that story, whoever Amnon was, if he existed. I love how it ties together the Israel and Israeli communities and diaspora in a way that not all prayers do. I love how within it there are these seemingly diametrically opposed themes, but they balance each other, such as this vertical partnership with God, but also that God is right, the king, the queen, the sovereign. Almost a threat runs throughout this. You know, who will live, who will die, who by choking, who by burning. But there's also a guide. We're God's partner. There's a guide in how to deal with this, how to delay this ultimate end that we all face. No one's getting out of it. I love how it ties together our history. I don't know if, are we going to show any of the text, Rabbi, at some point? I didn't remember if we finalized that, but, and if not tonight, when you look at your Machzor, please do, because it's a long poem, and 90% of it comes from verses from the Tanakh, our Bible, and a few other things. I love as a father of 3 little ones, I love how it teaches that our actions have consequences, right? It's not just gimme, gimme, gimme. This one really struck out when I was just writing late last night. What does Unetaneh Tokef do for me? On the Bima, and I think I feel it most on Rosh Hashanah day 1. I know not all of us have day 1 teams in our community necessarily, but for me, the magic of it, almost like the first Seder, and maybe it's in part, maybe I was raised in an Israeli family and we didn't do seconds, you know, but I never chanted without thinking of loved ones, either loved ones that have passed during the past year, especially within my congregation, or people, and I feel guilty almost when I do think of this, but people who I know are really sick. Will they make it to the next year? These people pop out in my head while I'm singing with a choir surrounding me. I don't want to go over time, but I love how it ties together me and my choir, and I love how I find other things in it when it's solo. And I love how the way we do it, we tie together our congregation in singing parts of it, and all of them sing. And when we talk again a little bit, maybe about the music, we can get more into that. Yeah, beautiful. I also love, I guess my last thing would be, and I think Rabbi Josh also, someone alluded to this, it ties together beautifully. You're actually living what it's saying is happening between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Because you're doing it at the beginning where, please God, let me get, I'll do the teshuvah, I'll do the tzedakah, and then when the gates are closed, you know, so it's almost an experience, not just a prayer.
Beautiful. You alluded to Cantor Doron, several different things. I loved how you tied so much together. And as you were talking about being alone singing with the choir, singing with your congregation, I was thinking about the heavenly choir that's sort of
referred to, yeah,
in the piyut. And the other thing you said, which I think is important and leads to my next question, which is, you said, oh, the writer of this piyut did a beautiful job of weaving together the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur theology with, like all great piyutim, the biblical allusions are many.
Yeah.
And yet you don't need to know those biblical allusions to feel empowered or powerful or feel its weight. As you said, even just talking about the people that come to your mind, I started to think about the people that come to our mind in our communities, and the both the pain and the joy that members of our community have encountered over the last year and what will be in the year to come. Given that poetry, I'd love to ask the 4 of you, and I'll put Ilana on the spot, because the awkwardness of Zoom is that it's very hard to choreograph, despite the fact that we're 6 months into that and we're sitting in this, it's not a round table, but as Stephanie pointed out earlier, there are round things on the ceiling, so at least you're getting a little bit of a round table. But I'll point it to Ilana, and then I'll let the rest of you jump in afterwards. It's a beautiful poem. Are there lines that you revel in, or that you are drawn into, that really speak to you and give us a little bit taste of that poetry?
I should have told you I want to go last on this one because I want to claim them all. But I'll say that the end piece I'll look at the text for one sec. It's a list of quotes, 2-word quotes from Tanakh, from the Bible. In Hebrew, it doesn't in English, it doesn't quite come out the same, that each quote is just 2 words, kecheres hamishpar, kechatzir yavesh, ketzitz novel, like broken shards, like dry grass, like a withered flower, like a passing shadow and a vanishing cloud, like a breeze that passes, like dust that scatters, like a fleeting dream. As you said, Rabbi Lisa, earlier, it doesn't sugarcoat the harshness of existence. And I just feel like I certainly would not want this prayer every day. This is a once in a year kind of prayer. But, we spend so much of our lives pretending to be stronger than we are, more balanced than we are, younger than we are, just trying to prop ourselves up. And there's something cathartic about once a year saying, actually, we're just a fleeting dream. Humanity is so fragile.
That's so beautiful. And I don't have anything nearly as profound, but I did want to say, since you touched on that part of it, in looking at a few different translations recently, it struck me how some of them are, I'll give you a couple examples, blowing wind, or blowing as wind, or in wind. And I thought of Dylan, or scattered dust in the wind, all these kinds of things that I think rock artists or folk artists with, the more things change, the French say, the more they stay the same. And we look at the beauty and what is it all about in similar ways.
Lisa, jump in.
Yeah, when you asked about the, a line that really stands out, for me, I went a little different. I went with the great shofar is sounded, and the still small voice is heard, that kol demadaka. And just because, again, like those are images that we get from other areas of both the High Holy Days and from other places in the Tanakh. But that contrast, really what I think is, if we took this prayer at face value, it would be a really hard time to kind of understand God. So what we do is we have kind of the opposite imagery, contrasting that God can be the big voice of the shofar, that loud blast of waking up and judgment and everything powerful that God is on the High Holy Days, but God can also be the still small voice inside of us. It could be, our own, just trying to hear that consciousness, that messaging of how to do good, and that we each respond to God differently. Some of us need this kind of shocking imagery to kind of wake us up and push us into this the state of repentance and doing better, and some of us need a little more gentle guidance, and we can find both of that in this prayer.
Anna, please jump in.
I just wanted to share that also, thank you for sharing this beautiful poetry. It is absolutely such vivid images in the liturgy itself. And when it gets to the musical interpretation of that, it gets even more dramatic, even more vivid. And especially if we're talking in the masterpiece, and I would like to talk a little bit today about the classical piece of Unetaneh Tokef by Max Janowski, when he literally physically brings to you the spirit of those words that Rabbi Lisa just mentioned, Uve shofar gadol yitaka, and there is a big voice and there is a small voice, every small voice that is heard, and then it continues. So my favorite phrase would be, and even angels would be trembling. And those vivid images are so vivid in the music that you can feel it in your kishkas and you can experience that. And you really get, quite a dramatic reaction to that. So I would like to get to that. And also to add to that I think it is our missions as cantors and rabbis to bring the depth of that meaning and all these highlights and different spectrum of different feelings, but mostly the depth of those those prayers into our congregation and make sure that it reaches everyone. And that's why I think we're going to talk about different texts and different interpretations tonight.
I love that idea of like, it's on your shoulders, it's on our shoulders. So like, how do you reach the depth of meaning? And it was powerful to hear you say, Anna, like, oh, there's a musical element to that. And to hear Ilana, the reference to, like, as you were bringing up the those two word lines, two word lines, yeah, like, oh, thematically that touches on a piyut from Kol Nidre, the Kecheres Knishbar, like the Kihine Kachomer, the like is what I was thinking about, and the Bible. It's like there's a little bit of, when you are in the world of liturgy, you're able to sort of be like in the Matrix, like, you know, all, when you can see the references and you can bring them in, and then you're able to shape your experience by knowing those different pieces. And and yet there's nothing, for me, there's nothing more powerful than when the Cantor, the Shaliach Tzibor, the person leading Tefillah, at that line that you spoke of, Cantor, Anna, of like the loud shofar, and then the like whispering cold madaka, like there's just like and everyone in the community is like on your words. It's so powerful. And yet I will say, and we've touched on this a little bit, and it would be great, given those of you who are community clergy are at the forefront of what it's meant to live through the last 18 months with deep pain and sorrow and the weight of that. It's been hard, even for those of us. Thank God I've had childcare. My kids have had school for a bunch. We're living deeply privileged, and yet the weight of the pandemic is on our shoulders. Let alone everything. It's fire season. It's the amount of what we deal with, as I think Lisa started us off with. The world is there. Brokenness is a nature. I'm not a cup half empty person, but there's difficulty. And liturgy isn't theology, and yet this is a deeply theological prayer. I know in conversations in my own family, my parents, my spouse, by the way, is a cantorial soloist. Hard. This is not an easy prayer to wrestle with. So I'm wondering, for those of us who find it challenging to read a prayer like this, who want to, many of high holidays about being together.
I think we're losing you a little, Rabbi.
I hear, I'm sorry. Tell us, how do you navigate the theological elements of this? How do you navigate such a powerful God? Can I put someone on the spot? Doron, you want to start us off? Great.
Yeah, I don't know that I have the answers, but I did want to start with maybe tying into that in my synagogue, and maybe it's time to change this a little. When we sing it, we always sing it, and 2 of the 3 times with a choir, but we always end with the crescendo of Uteshuva utefila utzedaka ma'avirin et zera. Right, this powerful, the teshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah have the power to transform the harshness of our destiny. And I think it's really only due to the length of it that we go silent then, or we might do some English, but right then, for all of the harshness we've been talking about, the text changes. Our praise of you accords with you. Let me go back to, you do not desire the death of the sinner, but rather that we change our ways and live. You wait until the day of death, and if one returns, you accept that person back immediately. Truly, you are their creator and know the nature of your creatures, that they are only flesh and blood. There's a lot of that, the Avinu part, not just the Malkeinu. And I don't know how that I would tie that in necessarily to everything we're dealing with right now, other than God is there for us and cares and wants us to do better.
That was beautiful, Doron. Thank you. We need that piece, right? It's not, it's not comfortable. This prayer is not comfortable, and none of the Yom Kippur liturgy is comfortable. But also, Tshuva is not comfortable. Any kind of meaningful change or growth is hard, and like it's hard to look honestly at ourselves, and we can't do it without that spirit that you just offered, Doron, without the faith that we have the capacity to do that, teshuva and tefillah and tzedakah, without the faith in ourselves that we have the capacity to change and make a difference and do better. But we also can't do the change without kind of confronting the harshness. And I think this moment, both the discomfort and the essentialness of it have never been more intense. That the times of crisis have this way of testing our mettle, testing our character, and we don't want to. We're hurting, we're scared, this is not a time when we want to be looking too closely at how did we respond and how are we responding. And yet the potential, if we do so, is enormous. The pandemic has forced us to ask really hard questions about how do we balance quality versus quantity of life? How do we approach risk? Who are the people that you stayed in touch with, and who did you let go? Did you? The burden of this pandemic was not borne evenly across our population by any stretch of the imagination. And how did we as individuals respond to that? Who were you generous to, and who were you not to? There are a lot of hard questions that we can be asking ourselves right now. And as I said, it's not comfortable, but this is the time to be doing it.
Anna, please.
I just wanted to comment. Thank you so much, Rabbi Ilana. That was really beautiful. But I just wanted to comment also on Doron, what you said earlier about Unetaneh Tokef and its reality, and its feeling real when you are chanting Unetaneh Tokef on the spot, and also connecting it to the part in the cemetery when we are doing life cycle events. In fact, when we're doing funerals, because there is specific line in Unetaneh Tokef that talks about Dayan Emet, God as a true judge. And this line we always say as we perform the Kriya ceremony right before the funeral. And it also, in my congregation, although this is only my second year there, so we've been doing two different settings, and one by Leonard Cohen that actually shifts the focus from a theological message to really question the mystery of death and all this, really reality where we are in broken world and all of that. And then on Yom Kippur morning, we are sort of coming back to Teshuvah by doing another setting, masterpiece of Max Janowski, when Cantor and choir singing the traditional Yom Kippur liturgy in Hebrew. And so it's like all collective and sort of back to ourselves. And this is, my sort of a short lens into what we're doing in our synagogue and what I am trying to accomplish musically, and also making that prayer as real as possible.
I maybe differ a little bit. I think that this prayer definitely kind of deserves a trigger warning before we sing it. I think that, for real, I know too many good people who have died, especially during the time in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that Teshuvah, Tefillah, Tzedakah, of course, that they represented those things. And it's really hard for someone who has lost someone to tragedy to have to sit and witness this poem. And I think it is perfectly acceptable to ask Jews to not have to stand and hear this and be subject to this on the high holy days. I think that Judaism needs to also make room for the anger and the grief and the fear that we hold when we face life. And yeah, just as powerful and dramatic and beautiful as it can be, to know that these words are also really hurtful, and this God is really hurtful. And there are so many other places in the High Holy Day liturgy, especially, that have such better, I don't want to say better, but more whole, more comforting, more embracing ideas of God, and a God that we want to be in relationship with than this. And I also think that it's okay if this prayer feels too much for you to say or too much to witness.
It's so powerful to like this, and this goes back to Ilana's point that liturgy is not theology alone. Like, I'm feeling pulled in both directions of, like, on one hand, mystery of the world, and we need that, and maybe if we embrace the mystery of creation, we maybe will enter it with more humility, and on the other hand, to know that there's real trauma and that we need to sometimes be able to take ourselves out of those spaces. I'll say there's a philosopher at BU named Adam Seligman, and he wrote an amazing book called Ritual and the Limits of Sincerity. And what he says, which I find really powerful, is the process of ritual creates an as-if world, a subjective world, a world that we imagine. And by going through ritual over and over again, it's not about the meaning of the words I'm saying, but it's about the possibility created by that ongoing ritual. And I share that simply to think about, as you were talking, Lisa, what does it mean to have Unetaneh Tokef? If it's alone, it's really difficult. When it's part of this system of ritual, of I'm going through it and I'm being thrown all these different theological images throughout the day, throughout the high holiday season, then I'm able to embrace a really broader view of this experience, and maybe I'm transformed by it. And again, as that collective is so important, I think part of that is obviously the music. And for me, the ritual, separating the ritual from the music is virtually impossible. As people, I was like, oh, I wonder what Ilana's even thinking in her head as she's talking about these persons, because she might be doing a different tune than I'm doing, or like Doron is talking about, do they have, and so I wanted to give space. I mean, we're so blessed to have Cantor Anna and Cantor Doron with us. I would love for you to share a little bit. You're picking tunes to construct an experience. You've shared a little bit about that. But we have the opportunity to hear you sing for a moment or two. I'd love to hear from both of you. Anna, we can start with you. Tell us a little bit more, not just about this tune, because you've shared a little bit, but like, give us a little taste of this tune and what you're trying to convey with and Doron, if you would do the same, that would be great.
Yes, I would love to do that, and I would love to share with you. So we use two different settings, one during Rosh Hashanah morning service, and we use a modern version of Unetaneh Tokef, written by Leonard Cohen, Canadian composer, who wrote lyrics as well, and it's called Who by Fire. And if I can ask maybe Kimberly or Stephanie to share the text with people, it would be great, as I would be singing just the first verse of that, and then we can discuss that. And I would like to put your attention specifically into the shifting and to see how real is this prayer, and how much of interpretation of human as vulnerable, as hurtful as the human can get. It brings completely different aspect of Unetaneh Tokef, and it's really talking about vulnerability and sense of fragility of life, and really reinforcing how how could we die? And specifically, I would like you to focus on the ending of that, and who shall I say is calling. And I think it has to do with the personal experience of the composer, who is the descendant of Holocaust parents. And also he lost his father when he was 9 years old. And I think this prayer really expresses his personal experience in a way. So it sounds like that. And who by fire, who by water, who in the sunshine, who in the nighttime, who by high ordeal, who by common trial, who in your merry, merry month of May, who by a very slow decay, and who shall I say is calling? And then it continues, and it brings to us other way of dying, and it also talks about the third verse about how we could die, all these possible ways of dying. And I'm sorry to bring this, but it really talks about those controversial issues such as suicide and all these issues that we're facing in the modern world, when it talks about who by his lady's command, who by his own hand, who in mortal chains, who in power. And again, it ends with a question mark, and who shall I say is calling? So thank you so much for sharing this text. I will try to be as brief as possible, and I would like to actually to segue to our next prayer that we are doing on Yom Kippur morning, which is more traditional prayer that highlights Unetaneh Tokef Hebrew text. And it starts in a different way. It has a complete different interpretation musically, and it highlights different phrases in the text. And I would like to be specific. And it highlights specifically the first part of Unetaneh Tokef, just those two words, Unetaneh Tokef, which literally means we are given this time, this period of time. And this period of time is our lifespan, right? And what we do in this lifetime is matter. But what it refers in music, it refers to this pulsation of our heart. And it has this vivid images in music. So what I would like you to do right now, if you don't mind, put your hand on your heart and try to feel your heartbeat. And I'm gonna just sing for you the beginning of that, just so you can get the pulsation part of that, and you can physically refer to this prayer. Unetaneh Tokef kedushat hayom. Then the choir goes. Unetaneh Tokef kedushat hayom. So it's very sustained, and it reminds us of the pulsation of our heartbeat. And then later on, it grows with a crescendo. And Doron, you mentioned the crescendo. And here it comes. So it comes like that. So the pulsation keeps going, and it really talks about God as a true judge. Dayan Emet, God as a true judge. And the last part, which is one of Rabbi Lisa's and my favorite part in Unetaneh Tokef, and this is going to be my last part that I would like to share with you, because I want to be on time. So it goes, "Uveshofar gadol yitaka," right? And the big shofar will be heard, and then and even the small voice will be heard, and even angels will be trembling. So it's a very vivid imagery, as you can say, and it ends with Hineh Yom Hadin. Here's the day of judgment. So it's really it brings us back to sort of a German romantic music. When you hear the music, you can see different images, and that's how I see the expression of music, and highlighting different parts of Unetaneh Tokef get really, really powerful and dramatic. And specifically, Rabbi Ilana, you talked earlier about Cantor and choir, and Doron, you also talked about that, and the prayer being as collective. So we hear in Cantor and choir version, the whole people of Israel talking and saying this prayer to us. Thank you.
Beautiful, thank you. And it's so evocative, and people at home may have, so I was like closing my eyes because it was so powerful. So thank you, so beautiful. Doron, you also have some tunes to share with us that I think help us. There's something about tunes. It's like, it's not Christmas music. It's not the same feeling, but it gets us in the.
No, but some of ours have written the best Christmas songs. So it's, no, but I will say, with your permission, maybe I'll make a couple plugs for pieces that I was going to maybe at least refer to when people get a chance. And I think actually, Kimberly, or we might have some links that if people are interested, that we can put them in the chat, or I could just refer to one that I think Rabbi Josh did when we first got together, just to pull this evening together, which is that one of my probably 3 favorite composers in Israel of blessed memory. He died too young. It's a man named Yair Rosenblum. And I'm not going to sing his thing. It's actually not that easy to sing, but after the Yom Kippur War, where 13 people were killed from Kibbutz Hashita, it's called, he wrote this beautiful piece for Unetaneh Tokef, and you'll hear it on Yom HaZikaron, and you'll hear this version, which I think American Jews are unfamiliar with. So you might want to check that out. If you just plug into Google, or, oh, there we go, I see some coming up. And then another one I was just going to show, though I won't tonight, we're running out of time. We could do this forever. I think the other one is by the Shira Choir, which some of you may have heard of. American, ultra-Orthodox, Ashkenazic, for the most part, young men that sing so beautifully. But they pulled it, they do this Sephardic take on this Israeli melody for this old Ashkenazic prayer. And it's worth, if you want to get a sense of things that are less traditional, or how younger people, and I know and Doron focused on that, and Leonard Cohen, and but there are lots of wonderful things out on the internet. I would just say, in terms of what we generally do, I should mention that I've been around a long time at Peninsula Sinai congregation, but for 4 years, I was a cantorial soloist, you would call it, because they still had their cantor at Peninsula Temple Bethel, but in the days when they would have community High Holy Day services in a local church for those who are unaffiliated, it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. For 4 of those years, I was the cantor. And I had done cantorial things prior to that, but I hadn't really done the High Holy Days. And so I decided to really come to some decisions on which pieces for certain things. And Lewandowski has always spoken to me. I think there are people, to me, it's not so much, is it beautiful as much as it is? For some people it is, and that's fine. For me, it's more, does this feel like he's nailed it? Like the music is expressing what these holy words are saying. And Lewandowski, who was, in the 1800s, Berlin, a great reform composer, to me, did that in a similar way, different but similar way that Yossele Rosenblatt did, where he composed these beautiful melodies, but anyone could sing them, let alone in more modern times, Shlomo Karlebach. So this is Lewandowski, and I think what might have turned me on, you probably can't see this, can you? But when I was a lad and starting out in all of this, I got this CD called my mother was born in a town that was then known as city, known as Danzig, now known as Gdansk, and fled as a very little girl in the nick of time and made it to Israel, Palestine. And this giant synagogue had a rich tradition, and they did a lot of Lewandowski. And I think that's what drew me here. And so I'll just a few snippets. We do it a cappella at Peninsula Sinai congregation. So I'm not going to pull out any of my percussion to play with it. Starts like this, from the get-go. Unetaneh Tokef kedushat hayom Ihu nora ve'ayom. So you feel that this is serious. Let us speak of the sacred power of this day. And then as it comes, I'll jump over. This is not actually the way Lewandowski wrote it, but I think it had already been in place here, and I left it where this Hasidic melody, many of you will know, Rosh Hashanah right? That a lot of people sing that. Usually we'll do that 3 times, and we'll intersperse it a few times throughout the Unetaneh Tokef. And then again, the music, who will be at peace, who will be troubled, who will be serene, who will be disturbed, who will be tranquil. Mi yanua, mi yanua, mi yashkit, mi etoraf, mi shalef, Umit yaser mi ani umi yashir mi yushpan umi yahu. And of all the lines that everyone joins in throughout these days, they're there for this one. Uteshuva utefila utzedaka ma'avirin et roa hagezera. I just sung that in a lower key than usual, but you get the idea.
I hope all of you at home, I guess we're all at home, were moved the way I was listening to both of you. The power of the music, it helps us transcend time and space. And in some respects, that's what the Chagim are about, the high holidays are about. We come back to this moment, and it's really so powerful to have your voices and your song with us. I've got a number of questions from our community. There's still time if some of you want to throw a question in. We have a few more minutes for question and answer, but a couple of people asked a version of this question. I apologize to those of you who asked it that if I direct it one way or another. But a number of people asked, well, what are the questions or concerns you hear from congregants, either about this prayer or as high holidays start to loom on the horizon? Lisa, you talked about there are people who, my Zaidi actually, who died between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. People, it's a moment of, as we know, holidays are a moment of trauma, they're a moment of joy, they're a moment of reminding us, they're a moment of transporting us. When you've encountered congregants who have either asked questions specifically about this prayer or about the high holidays in general, what are the types of concerns you're hearing from your congregants?
Are you asking this year in particular or in general?
There was a series of questions that were both about, well, have you had any congregants ask you a question about this prayer? And also people, the question of just in general, when as high holidays start to emerge, what are the concerns that you hear from your congregants? What are the questions? And I think part of the reason why that's of interest is it helps us, it gives us permission to ask questions to our rabbinic and cantorial leaders, our clergy. It provides us an opportunity for realizing, oh wait, we are all human and we're all have joys, ups and downs and all of this. I'm wondering if that leads to a story or two or a response. Great. If not, we'll be able to say, this isn't a major concern for people, but I imagine you have some experiences with the high holidays and with congregants.
As with, my answer to this is almost the same as with bar mitzvahs and with kind of any big event that has lots of people coming together that sadly, I mean, this is human. We all do it. I do it too. There's a lot of frenzy around the details. And it's hard to remember to just be kind of patient with the subtle process of prayer, and also I have a little bit of distancing that the prayers don't speak to us. I mean, Lisa, I think as you were saying earlier about that this prayer is too painful for many people, and I think that's true, and that speaks to the power of the prayer. But I actually hear much more often the opposite, that it's hard to penetrate this type of poetry and this set of images, and so kind of there's I appreciate when people come with a genuine desire to try to figure out how to be present to it, given that it's often distancing.
Yeah, I think that if you come and you're not quite sure how you're going to show up and you end up being really emotional, or you end up, whether that because it brings you to tears, or you get angry and need to leave. I mean, whatever that emotional response is, to just, as Rabbi Ilana was saying, like to feel it and be present with it, because it means that you're doing it right. It means that you're not just going through the motions and showing up because you're checking the holiday off the list, but you're really trying to engage in whatever way. But to answer your question of like, how have congregants reached out and what are their concerns? I recently had a call of just, I don't know that I can return to the sanctuary because it was the place where I also had to say goodbye to my loved one. The last time I was in the sanctuary, we were there for a funeral, and now you're expecting me to return and be surrounded by community and just kind of show up so vulnerably and maybe I'll add and be judged and feel, like now I have to stand here and submit to whatever this external sense of judgment is. But when really I think it's just last time this space now is a hard space for me. And again, I think it speaks to like, yeah, if this space, if being in the room, if being with Jewish community, if being in Jewish ritual is, brings up any kind of emotion, whatever it is, it's something that we should sit with and not just try to abstain from it because it'll be, more comfortable to skip it or more comfortable to stay at home in a non-COVID year, stay at home, to not participate. So I think that's real. All the emotion that the holidays bring up, missing family, thinking about who you used to sit with, thinking about the way that the melodies just pierce us, as Anna, you said, in our kishkas, we hear this melody and we know, and that's hard. So.
Given that, I really appreciate that statement of, like Sholom, like therapy, if it's bringing up emotion, you should sit with it, and you should not be like, this is, for me, you go to both for both reasons, right? You don't run away. And so it's a very powerful statement. I guess to conclude our evening, I would love to hear each of you, like, this for me has been a machaya, enlivening, in that, all right, I'm less than 2 weeks away. I need to be doing even more spiritual work. On a very basic level, go read like the Siddur, go remind yourself, the Machzor, go remind yourself of what the liturgy is. But what's the spiritual work you want your congregants to do between now and Rosh Hashanah, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur onward? What for you feels like the important spiritual work for people to be doing right now?
This kind of goes against the again, I'm not having a role tonight, but it's be compassionate to yourself, be gentle on yourself. This was a really hard year, 2 years, and that you're not maybe showing up to the holidays as prepared as you might like to be. You're not showing up to the holidays maybe in the way you hoped to show up this year, in a physical way. You maybe didn't get to reach all of your goals or accomplish everything you wanted to do, for better and worse. Just be gentle.
Yeah, that question reminded me of, I'm almost sure it was Rabbi Lawrence Kushner who said, I'd never really stopped to think about why Teshuvah, Tefillah, Tzedakah. There's so many other ones you could go to, Ahava and Talmud Torah, and he gets a little funny, as he tends to, and besides, aren't the real tips like low cholesterol diet and stuff like that? But I think those are all important. But I just wanted to touch on one when you asked. The first thing that popped in my mind, it's a little more pshat than some of the other answers, but I've taken to giving like a shofar every year to someone, like as a gift. I find, and it may be unusual for a cantor to say, but if not the moving, certainly there's nothing more moving, nothing that moves me more. Maybe it's because I'm not singing it, I don't know. Nothing that moves me more than the sound of a shofar in terms of commitment to the future and where we come from. And I think a lot of us, just to be blunt, maybe outside of the Orthodox world, but are not doing it daily during Elul. And it's such a beautiful tradition. And I think it just gives you a moment to maybe also the compassion, the kindness, and let's take a moment and just, where are we? What is this about? How can I become better? Shofar goes a long way. More than all of the words, not more, in a different way than all of the words that we say.
Beautiful. Yeah, Cantor Anna.
Thank you. Thank you, Cantor Doron. I was actually so excited to sing with you in person for this round table and to be with all of you in person. And I just really got so heartbroken about going into Zoom, but I completely understand the logic. Yes, we are trying to save lives and not to get anybody infected. So I just wanted to talk about this pandemic because I came here a year ago from New York. I moved my entire family from New York, and it's been quite a challenge for me personally, but it's been quite a challenge for everybody in every congregation around the whole entire world. And I am sure that people are, challenged with both coming into the sanctuary in person or doing the worship services virtually. I think both have different challenges, and nothing excites me more than hearing my congregants sing along with me in a big setting, together with the choir when multiple voices are coming together. Unfortunately, this year is not happening. So my message to myself and to all of you is just be patient, be compassionate to each other. And, although, a lot of people might be really heartbroken from the reality, be sensitive to each other and to yourself, and take it with a grain of salt, and with a hope that there is always a light at the end of tunnel, that next year could be better.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen. I want to kind of build on what you said, Anna, and what Lisa said, that I the need for compassion to ourselves. And I think a oft-repeated refrain is, I've had it so much better than others. You said it earlier too, Josh. God knows I probably say it 5 times a day, at least. And it's true, though not of all of us on the screen, I'm sure, but many of us have been incredibly privileged over this time and are aware of how others have suffered so much more deeply. And that can lead us to deny that we may have also suffered. There is, I think, in the same way I talked earlier about the necessity, or not this necessity, but almost the imperative. We may not be there yet, but there is at some point a moral imperative to ask ourselves, what did this year show us about our character? And we may not individually be there yet. We can't get there until we first acknowledge what we have suffered, and heal and mourn and heal that. And then that opens the space for the compassion that you were speaking of, Anna, and the work we need to do to kind of not just do a formal nod to the fact that others have suffered, but have suffered even more, but actually make changes in our responses that we can carry forward in a meaningful way. So it's a multiple steps. The spiritual work, because the trauma has been so deep, the spiritual work is so deep. It's acknowledging the suffering, having compassion for ourselves, and then doing the work of analyzing how we reacted and how we want to react going forward.
This community is really just so blessed to have the 4 of you as religious leaders, and it's so powerful to be able to sit with you metaphorically. And I agree with you on, I wish we could have all been together. And I think the language of compassion, of patience, of deep reflection, and acceptance, admitting of doing that work of tshuva is so powerful. As you were speaking, Anna, I was thinking of yet another Leonard Cohen of, it's not just the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's the cracks, everything's cracked, and that's where the light will come through. And to be able to embrace that, I feel like it's not a Bay Area Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah conversation if there's not some Leonard Cohen. Certainly at my small little Orthodox shul in Berkeley, that's the case. And to Doron's point, that non-verbal element, the sound of the shofar, the sound of release, right? Yom Truah, it's the day of release. It's the day of the shofar, of blowing the shofar, of hearing that, of being in that space, and being beyond words is the power of Rosh Hashanah. And as you alluded to, we blow the shofar every day during Elul. And so we're going to end our time together tonight. Stephanie is going to, well, I'll hand it to Stephanie And she'll end with blowing the shofar and giving us some words of before that, words of thanks to all of our participants, but we'll say thank you to her and to the PJCC for hosting us. And may everyone be inscribed in the book of life, and may we have a year of health and happiness and communal, collective return. So Stephanie.
Amen.
Thank you so much. On behalf of the PJCC and all of our community partners, we're so thrilled to have everyone with us tonight, and want to just say thank you so much to our wonderful panelists, Cantor Doron, Rabbi Ilana, Rabbi Lisa, and Cantor Anna. Thank you so much for making time and making this work, even though we've changed the formats a couple times. And an extra special thank you to my friend and teacher, Rabbi Josh Ladon, for joining us at an event that he had never seen before, with colleagues he had never met before, and just jumping in to help us facilitate this. So with that, as Josh mentioned, we've always closed this event with the sound of the shofar. So I'm gonna blow the shofar now and hope it brings us a year of sweetness and health and happiness. Thanks for joining us.